Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everyone, I am so delighted to introduce today's guest, Harry Duran. Harry is the founder of Fullcast, a full-service done-for-you podcast production and marketing consultancy. He is a heart-led entrepreneur who specializes in being a conduit for awakened souls ready to broadcast their genius in a way that radically transforms their audience's lives. Harry has 20 plus years of corporate marketing experience. He entered the world of podcasting in 2014 with his first show, Podcast Junkies. He has subsequently hosted and launched 3 additional shows, including the #1 ranked Vertical Farming podcast. He has interviewed over 400 guests, and through his agency, Fullcast, has helped over 110 clients launch their shows. Please join me in welcoming Harry Duran. Welcome, Harry.
Hi, Tammy. It's so nice to be with you again for part 2 of our conversation.
Yes. And I had the honor of being a guest on Podcast Junkies. So thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm glad that we now get to turn the tables on you and learn more about you. And
Yes.
you did such an amazing job interviewing me. I don't know. We'll have to see how I do with you. It's
a collaborative effort. So
there you go.
We're in this together.
Thank you. So as you know, on Work from the Inside Out, we really enjoy starting from the early days. So take us back to those formative years of yours and how they may or may not have informed where you are today.
So just as a bit of a background, I was actually born in El Salvador, and my parents brought me to the United States when I was a year old. So I had to actually become a citizen when I was just before I think I turned 18. My brother was born there, but my younger brother and my younger sister were born here in the States. So I grew up in Yonkers, New York, just outside New York City. So for folks that know the map, it's Manhattan, the Bronx, and then Yonkers. Mm-hmm. So Yonkers is the first city. So as far as upbringing, I mean, it's one of those childhoods you think is normal and everyone has it until nowadays you realize that kids don't play outside in the street anymore. And, there were no phones back then. So we just kind of got into it and got into a lot of trouble and then, scrapes and cuts and everything. And just, I remember one day we tried to build a tree house in a neighboring woods, and I came back with one shoe less, trying to explain to my parents like what I had done. So yeah, I think overall it was a fun upbringing. And as far as getting ready for like what my career would be, I did go to a private high school. Then I did a year in Syracuse University, but I just got distracted, sort of went off the rails a little bit and lost my focus and ended up coming back to New York and just going to a local college. And then I jumped around for a bit. I never really completed my degree because there was an opportunity opening up at Chase Bank as a teller. And back in those days, this is like late 92, you had to like go on this interview, you had to take this test, and I actually showed up in like a suit. So I was like, oh, I'm wearing a suit to work, so that must mean I've made it. But I was a quick learner, and I was very adept with technology. I've always been an early adopter with computers, and my dad got into the computer sort of servicing business, which was a great thing for him to just go back to school and learn. He went back to night school to learn that.
Wow.
And then because of that is how I actually learned, he brought computers home. We had an intelligent typewriter from it was actually Exxon that made it. They used to make these electric typewriters. It would have one little LCD screen. And so you'd be able to type out that one line, you hit return, and then it would print it on the paper.
I remember those. I didn't know they were made by Exxon, but
Exxon Quicks. It was called the Quicks, QYX.
Wow.
And so that was like my foray, and then eventually computers and learning how to program, and my Texas Instruments computer early on with like the tape, the cassette tape recorder, save files, and
wow.
And then the floppy disks. So yeah, I had like that. I was always, I was just really drawn to it out of all the kids, the siblings. I've always been a fan of technology. And so I quickly moved up the ranks in the banking world. My what I call now my corporate godfather was paying attention. He was the branch manager, and he saw that, I was pretty adept at what I was doing. And he moved me to like the select services line, which is like the premium clients, and then eventually onto the floor, opening up accounts. And then eventually that got promoted to like the select representative. And then he went on to another project. He brought me with him. So I learned how to like, we did this project where we used underused windows in low to moderate income neighborhood branches. And we installed this like high tech at the time check cashing system. So I was basically his operations manager. I helped him write an operations manual from scratch, and
Wow.
I kind of just kept moving up the ranks, and eventually I worked in the corporate card department. I worked in an e-businesses department in Chase, and just always kind of with an eye towards different opportunities. Around 1999, the dotcom craze hit. And I jumped at it, cashed out my 401k to work at a job that wasn't paying me because of the thought of like dotcom millions. But
Wow.
that didn't pan out as planned. So I went to go. I remember getting a job as a waiter, and I was like in my like late 20s, 30s, and I had to go. And then I had another opportunity to go work with my half brother in Atlanta at some point in construction of all things. So I went to do that for a couple of years. That didn't pan out. So like at 34, I tell the story. I came back with like my tail between my legs to go live with my folks.
Wow.
And so it's just like all these things happen. But I feel that the common thread was there, just kind of like listening to other people's voices and this concept of like, what's the story that I want to tell? Like, how do I want to take care of myself and be responsible for my own future? So, in the beginning, it was listening to my dad. He's like, you got to go to college. He would play like these vinyls of like Think and Grow Rich or
Oh, goodness.
The Richest Man in Babylon, and like these inspirational tapes. But like back in the day, like now they're classics and I've read them and I'm like, there's a ton of wisdom in there. But for some reason, my stubborn like high school mind was just like not in the position to like absorb that information. I mean, it was really great information, and that's timeless wisdom in there, but I just wasn't ready.
Yeah.
And so with the dotcom phrase, I just kind of followed a mutual friend that I was introduced to. I kind of wanted to ride his coattails with the trip to Atlanta. Like I was following my half brother.
Yeah.
And what happened, I had a little side story. Like when I came back from Thailand, I had a ticket. I mean, when I came back from Atlanta, I had a ticket to Thailand because I had met a friend a couple of years ago. And he said, come visit me in Thailand. My parents have a house there. So on one of the islands. And so I went to visit. This was after I had no job. I was like, I'm going to go at least do that.
Wow.
So he picks me up on a scooter. We travel around the island. We end up going on this hike up this mountain. And then long story short, he's on this ridge and he's looking out over the valley. He's like, you got to come and see this view over here. So I step into the stream that's in between him and I. And I step in it and there's like smooth rocks underneath. So I immediately like fly up in the air and I land on my back and I proceed to be carried over the edge of the falls.
Oh my
This
goodness.
happened so fast, Tammy. It was like seconds. I felt like a paper boat in one of those, you put them in a little stream.
Yeah.
And I was like, I saw myself being carried on my back towards the edge of the waterfall in some random mountain in Thailand. And there was a big stone on the bank, at the left side of the bank. And just happens, reflexes, they just happen within microseconds. I stuck my leg out and that kept me from going over. And my friend is like staring at me. His eyes are as wide as saucers. And he's like, whoa. And that's one of those, there's a couple of handful of moments in my life where I felt like I could have died. And that was definitely one of them.
Wow.
So I got up, he picked me up out of there and I was kind of shook for a while, but shook it off. We ended up having a good trip. The rest of the week was really fun. Got to see a lot of temples and sites, but it's so funny because you think about these things after the fact. And then I've taken some public speaking classes to kind of like see my life stories. And one of the things that popped out for me is like, I think about what a shame it would have been for me to die with my voice inside me.
Ooh. Ooh. Yeah.
And that started to resonate with me. And I was like, well, I got to, figure something out because I'd always have these entrepreneurial things. And then I was in my latest incarnation working at E-Trade. And then that job was eliminated. And then I did some consulting for a company called Sama, business intelligence software. But that only lasted for about a year and a half. And I realized like, this is not my expertise. Like they're going to hire someone with more skills pretty soon. So I was always interested in electronic music. I grew up DJing. That's my first passions. I still have my vinyl and my turntables, and I play with them for a while. But I wanted to start a podcast to interview DJs because I was fascinated with the culture. So I went to a conference in 2014 called New Media Expo in Las Vegas. And it was bloggers, YouTubers, and podcasters. And I said, I got to learn how to podcast because I want to start this podcast and interview DJs, because I had a mobile app I built for electronic music and I was going to like promote it. I quickly realized like I can't track down all these globetrotting DJs. Like it's going to be a nightmare to interview them. Yeah. I said, what about these podcasters? I saw Pat Flynn was there, a couple of other, Amy Porterfield. And I was like, whoa, these are interesting. I was like, well, let me learn how to podcast about podcasting by interviewing podcasters. So that's how Podcast Junkies was born.
Oh, interesting. So I'm going to take you back a few years for a moment, because you just raced us through a lot of years there. There's a lot of living in there. And I just want to clarify a few points in terms of, and even though you slowed down enough to tell us about your almost near-death experience in Thailand, but you were on this sort of banking career trajectory, and then something, and I think if I'm getting this right, you did not finish college when you went to work for Chase. So that was still at a time when there was a time when you didn't have a bachelor's degree.
Yeah, you weren't getting a job anywhere.
You weren't getting a job. So clearly you went in with your suit and you were hireable, let's say.
Yeah.
And so you were with Chase Bank for several years. It sounds like 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, started in 92. And then I left in, I think it was probably 2010-ish. Yeah.
Oh, it was that late? Okay.
Yeah, well, I left a couple of times because because like I said, that the dotcom craze was like 99.
Right. So, that's what I was tracking.
I moved my way up until like a job in their e-business division. And I was just very resourceful. Like I remember at one point when I had left for the dotcom thing and that didn't work out. I was having lunch with what I call my corporate godfather. And he's like, did you want to come back? I was like, yeah.
Oh,
like,
nice.
He's like, we need a job as a project manager, right? And I was like, he's like, do you know how to do that? And I was like, sure, no problem. So we hung up the phone. I know nothing about project management, but I was like, I just headed to Barnes and Noble, picked up 3 books on project management, and like everything else in life, it's figure outable, right? Figure outable. And I was like, I got the concepts. I'm organized. I do well with like programs, and like I know I can figure this. So I downloaded Microsoft Project. I kind of figured it out, and I wasn't I wasn't running the department, but I had someone who was there and kind of showed me the ropes, and I just kind of hit the ground running, and I did that for like a couple of years.
I see.
Like a year and a half. So I was always like looking for new opportunities, because the challenge with being in corporate is you're never going to get like a huge pay bump unless you like shift departments, right? And every time I left and came back, I would get a higher salary.
Well, so I guess that was one of my questions: was what was it that you were looking for each time you made a move? Because was it a higher salary? It sounds like you also had a tremendous amount of curiosity, a thirst for new things. It sounds like it wasn't just where can I make more money? Even though, the dot-com era, of course, was very appealing in that way. But I could imagine, given your early, enthusiasm for computers, I could see why that would have appealed to you as well. And being in a corporate environment would have been a little restrictive around really being able to explore things in that way. It sounds like you were pretty, there was a part of you that really wanted to either take some risks or be more creative or innovative in that way. Not to put words in your mouth, but I got the feeling that but then there was this other very scrappy part of you that said, well, you know what? I need to just wait tables right now. I need to work construction. I'll do what it takes. I've got to keep a roof over my head. And then when push came to shove, you moved back in with the parents for a little while, but you did what you had to do. but there was nothing from what I'm hearing that really was going to stop you from trying different things and pursuing some new ways of looking at things, even if you did find yourself going, we're saying going back to Chase, but it seems like each time you went there was for something new.
Yeah,
and
it's for something new for
it's
sure.
almost like kind of getting yourself replenished and then going out into the world again.
Yeah, it's almost like I had that. I'm grateful for that relationship. We're still friends to this day. And, he was always like open, he's like, oh, if that's what you feel like you need to do and try, you should definitely try it. And
that's amazing.
Yeah. So
that is really remarkable.
He wasn't holding my job or anything, but I would come back and I would, do something new. And then there was I'd come back to Chase, and then I worked at the corporate card department, and that was something new as well. We were implementing and traveling across the country, implementing corporate cards in these, in these businesses, the companies' departments, for their travel departments. And so I learned that as well.
Yeah.
But it was just so many different opportunities. And then when the opportunity came to work with my half brother, I was like, well, this is kind of entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
He wants me to be the GM of his business. And I went down and helped him, and I helped him grow the business. But, as they say with all things family, kind of like got a little rough at the end when we were missing payroll. And I was like, oh man.
Oh boy.
But it was crazy because I went down, got my hard hat. I learned how to do takeoffs of blueprints.
Wow.
And just literally how to give quotes, so just.
That's the other thing I want to sort of point out here is it seems like there was a part of you that was a little bit fearless about just stepping into new things and either being a quick study or maybe you kind of talked your way into things. I don't know. But, going into construction without, I don't know if you had experience in that before, but it sounds like it wasn't your favorite thing to do, but somehow you ended up walking in there and getting a job.
And it wasn't like I was there laying brick. I was kind of the GM, helping them run the operations and just kind of grow the business and just submit bids and so just kind of learning helping install the computer network in the office, which is what I knew to do. So but then when I came back, I had met my then fiance at the time when we lived in Atlanta for a little stretch. And so basically when I got back, just kind of figured out, just kept in touch with him. He had moved on to E-Trade at that point. And so that's when we started staying in conversations. I moved with E-Trade. I just kind of went back and started there around 2005. And then that was sort of the majority of like the second half of my career there, because I started moving up in a couple of different places, in a couple of different positions there. And then they had an opportunity open up in Atlanta, and I was already married at the time, and with my then wife that we had met in Atlanta. So I was like, okay, let's go back. And so and that was an opportunity to get promoted to a director position.
I see.
And he said, if you want a director position, you got to go to Atlanta. And I was like, well, that's fine. I know, we know Atlanta.
Yeah.
So they paid for my moves. It's like, so they would pay to relocate us.
Yeah.
And then we were in Atlanta for a couple of years. It was a nice time there, and got reconnected with a bunch of friends. And then I would always just kind of like see where there's opportunities for new positions. And at one point, one of the VPs had come down for like an all hands meeting or something. And it was like, we were having like a reception or something. And I just felt to say, hey, if you got something opening up, like I'm ready and willing to try new positions. And so there was this new program director position opening up in New York. And it was a way for me to get back to New York. So, I applied for it, and they said it's a new position, so we'll figure it out. And then they flew me back they got us back to New York. So they paid for that relocation as well. And then that was definitely more challenging because I'd never really had a program manager role, and so it was a bit bumpy. And the program we were trying to get off the ground wasn't picking up the momentum that they had expected. So I think ended up doing it for about maybe 6 months, and then they just eliminated the position. So and so they gave me a severance.
Oh goodness.
But thankfully I had built a lot of relationships within the industry and business intelligence software companies. So one of the people made a referral to me to someone at another company, and they hired me, and they were actually based out of California. So I started working with that. That was Sama. That was the last company I was working with.
I see.
And I did sort of like an account manager. So my main account was Unilever, and I was doing implementations of like staffing, because they were staffing, but focused on business intelligence software. So I learned a lot of that. Some of that I knew, but some of that I had to learn on the go. So it was, again, something that I wasn't like well versed in, and supply chain management is something that I had to learn as well, because dealing with Unilever, I had to figure some of this stuff out. So I would go there and sit in like the Unilever office and just observe the team and work with them and saying, oh, okay, it looks like you might need a resource. Maybe we can get you a resource. So I did that for about 2 years. And then eventually we moved to LA.
Oh, wow.
Because we just wanted to get out of New York. And we were there, moved there in 2014. I was still working with Sama. And then they had hired a supply chain expert, and who had like 20 years of experience. And I'm like, my job is going to get eliminated. I could see it right away, because I was working with him, and he clearly was kind of like the expert in this area. And I was like, that's when I started to figure out, like, what am I going to do? And I had started this, podcast junkies, just as a side thing. It was just a hobby. But what I realized is I did everything myself then, And then what had happened is I was in this transition phase. I realized like my job was about to be, I was kind of like called walking the plank. Like they were slowly about to like nudging me off, nudging me out. And I found a business coach in like digital marketing, a world that like I knew nothing about. And I was like, whoa, this is, it wasn't cheap. It was $1,500 a month to work with this coach. Yeah. So like, nowadays, you understand in the world of this digital marketing, and that's, it's common, and that's probably low for working with coaches, but he was really good at what he was doing. And he helps coaches go from one to one to one to many.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a coach. I didn't even have a coaching program at the time, but I was so impressed by his frameworks and how he put everything together for digital marketing. And I was like, this is the guy that I'm going to learn from. And essentially I joined the group, and then, and it's called Black Belt, and it's still around to this day. It's doing very well. But I realized, wow, so when I joined that group, Tammy, I came across the Jim Rohn quote of you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yes.
And I was like, I come from this like 9 to 5 world of people, like maybe there's some like what they call entrepreneurs, people who are doing innovative things but with the safety of a corporate, paycheck. But I was like, this world, I called it digital Narnia. Like I didn't know the world existed. It's 6-figure, 7-figure business owners making $30,000 a month, and now 40,000. I was like blown away. I was like, what is this? So I was in there, I was in the deep end, and I was like, I felt huge imposter syndrome being in the same room as these people. But I was like, I think I have something here, because I had been doing my podcast for a year, and I did everything. I did the interview, I did the graphics, I wrote the show notes, I listened, and I edited the audio, and I posted it to the hosting. I did all my socials. I would go to Podcast Movement with t-shirts of my podcast and just like market the show. Like I was like leaving no stone unturned. Yeah. And then I realized, these people understand opportunity cost, and they understand what an hour of their time is worth. And they're paying this guy $1,500 a month. There's like 30, 40 people in the room. So do the math. Like, right. This guy's making. And I was like, but they value their time. And if they can get somewhere faster, when they think of a task that needs to get done, they're not thinking of how, they're thinking of who.
Yes.
And so I started packaging it and kind of doing some stuff on the board in one of the sessions. And someone happened to be watching within the mastermind group. And he's like, hey, on the break, he's like, when that thing is ready, let me know, because I've been thinking about starting a podcast. So this is now 2015. And I remember I got home on a Saturday from the 2-day intensive that we had in the group. And he calls me. He's like, hey, is that podcast thing, is that something you can do? And I was like, yeah. He's like, okay, let's do it. So I just kind of came up with some pricing. I think I charged him $1,000, and I said, here's my PayPal. and then that was the start. That was 2015. And wow, just dove into the world of entrepreneurship. Again, a lot I didn't know, and pay your taxes. I'll just leave it at that. And then just figuring out like this idea of, I tried a bunch of things in the beginning, but as an entrepreneur, you learn the concept of like failing fast and, but just getting up, just get up quicker, in the beginning, I'd be like wallowing in misery, just like, oh my God, I spent $1,000 on this program or $2,000 on this coach, and like nothing happened. But it's like, you just develop this sort of resiliency as an entrepreneur. If for those that succeed and keep doing it, and like I'm going into my ninth, and getting into my 10th year next year.
Well,
but
it's
just now feeling like I'm getting my sea legs as an entrepreneur.
Really
figuring it all. Well, just figuring it out. There's so much happening in that time.
Yeah. No, it's true.
So much to learn. Yeah.
No, I hear you loud and clear. It feels like, when you talk about, you describe yourself as having been a 9-to-5er, and yet as I'm listening to your career trajectory, yeah, there were elements of the years you were a 9-to-5er, and yet there's just something about you that is so not a 9-to-5er. I mean, even just the way that you went about and then entered each of these different opportunities, and kind of, it's almost like you dipped a toe in that water and then that water and then that water, and then all of a sudden you were swimming.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it wasn't always, that simple. I'm sure that's true. And yet I'm thinking like someone listening to how you moved from one thing to the next and made decisions.
Yeah.
It sounds like there was sort of an instinct within you that just said, yeah, I think I'll do this now. And you didn't overthink it too much, at least not in the earlier years.
Yeah. And I think the way I thought about it, because, it's interesting. You think about something as strange as like cashing out your 401k, like that's, which is verboten in like financial circles, like people like, but for me, I looked at that and I, at one point I was like, I'm not going to be able to retire on that amount. And I was like, I'm going to invest it in myself. So that's what I did. I used it to start up my business. And I was like, this is like, I have to, if I don't, it's almost like a burn the bridges moment, burn the boats moment. It's like, like if I don't believe in me, like no one else is going to believe in me. And if I don't believe that I can do this, like that I'm not, as Henry Ford said, it was Henry Ford, whether you think you can or you can't, or Einstein or one of them, either way, you're right.
Right.
And so, I was like, I have to make this work. And in the beginning, you're just doing everything you can. And like, just to get money coming in, get that cash flow going and get new clients and hustle. But I just kind of like I think I learned a lot in E-Trade. I almost absorbed it by being around all these great marketers, because I was more in like kind of the business intelligence area of marketing. I wasn't like, and I was at JP Morgan Chase, but I wasn't in finance. So I didn't study finance, but I just I happened to have like an amazing mentor who was a financial wizard. And being in the corporate marketing department, that was around the time of the E-Trade baby and the Super Bowl ads. And so they were trying out some really wild stuff.
Yeah.
And I think by osmosis, I sort of got the kind of the marketing bug. So as I started working on my business, nowadays I just really love geeking out on all things marketing. And I've tried so many things for my podcast, and then with my agency, just trying what works. And then what I realized is joining these high-end masterminds was really key, because you're surrounded by these high-performing entrepreneurs, and a lot of my clients ended up coming from there. So I just repeated that a couple more times. I joined like 2 or 3 more high-end masterminds, and eventually, like I would do their podcast for them, and then they'd let me in the group. So that was a savings of like $20,000 or whatever it was.
Nice.
But I was able to barter. I had a high-ticket offer that I could barter with.
Right.
So they saw it as an equal exchange. And then again, I would meet these other people, and I'd be the podcast guy in the group.
Right.
And they'd be like, "Oh, Harry knows the podcast. If you want a podcast, talk to Harry."
Right.
And over the years, that's how I've been building up. And then I keep my first show, Podcast Junkies, because it's my training ground for podcasting. Like I'm on 340 plus episodes, and I love the fact that I can just hone the craft. Like, and I teach my clients this, like how to be better interviewers. And I have to keep doing it myself, because I never want to get like rusty. I never want to feel like rust on my laurels.
Right.
But it's just, and there's always so much to learn about podcasting and all the different platforms and how to market a show, how YouTube is important now. So we're learning that. And so, I'll pause there, and then I'll go into the story about how I started that second show.
No, go ahead. Go.
and for the listener and the viewer, I think, it all comes back to this idea of finding your voice, right?
Yes.
I told that story, and then you start to see, oh my gosh, podcasting is this platform. and it helps you find your voice,
Yeah.
and that's why when we talk to, prospects, we talk to people that we work with, podcast is a great way to amplify your authority and just amplify your authority and expand your voice and show your expertise. And it's really like this platform, because now you imagine if you were like saw someone that you wanted to build a relationship with or network with, and you said, "Hey, Susie, I like your work. Would you mind if we grab some coffee, or can I pick your brain?" Which at this point is code for, "Can I get some free consulting?" Right.
Right.
But if you say, "Hey, Susie, I've got a podcast, called Work from the Inside Out, where I tell some of the most inspiring stories from people that I've come across, and I think your story resonated with me, and I think would really inspire my listeners. Would you like to come on my show?"
Mm-hmm.
Complete change. She's like, magically an hour now opens up on her calendar, and she's like excited to come on, right? And so I started to see like how I was like being able to open doors and have these conversations. So it's like I always have this platform to have these conversations. The only thing is like someone just needs to have a podcast and that is serious about it. I just interviewed someone who founded this company called Acast and now co-founded a new company called Wondercraft, which does like AI, sound for podcasting. But he was like this number 23 employee at Spotify. So he's like, pretty big name in the space. We had a great time.
Yeah.
He's like, this is a great conversation. It's the one that just got released, Oscar Surrender. And he's like, when I'm doing the show, I'm going to be at the podcast show in London. It's another conference.
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
If you're there, because we're doing a private event and I'd love to like invite you. So it's like
I'm not going to be there.
Doors keep opening up. But on the second show, one of my clients in 2019 gave me a book called Abundance by Peter Diamandis.
Yes.
Fantastic. I love future stuff. I love technology stuff. And he's talking about like different categories. And he's talking about the future of, health, the future of food. In the future of food, he's talking about vertical farming. And I was like, I think I've heard something about this. And it led me to a book called The Future is Vertical Farming by Dixon Despommier. He's a Columbia professor. And it was a short read, ordered in Kindle, read through it. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. So now my marketing brain starts working. We have a podcast agency. I know how to do long form interviews. I said, can I start a show that would be sponsorship driven from day one? And I got to make it high profile. So how do I do that? I'm only going to interview CEOs and founders.
Wow.
So I started thinking about this. And so I put this plan together. I said, I'm going to call it the most obvious name possible, Vertical Farming Podcast. The domain was available, verticalfarmingpodcast.com. So that's the name of the show. And if you think about it, when people have told me this, and so they validated this idea, I was searching for a podcast about vertical farming and yours came up. I was in the Apple Podcast and I was searching for vertical farming and your podcast came up. But I literally reverse engineered so that happened. If you Google vertical farming podcast, those three words, almost 80% of the listings that you see on the front page of Google is my show. It's either the link on Spotify, it's the link on Apple, it's my website. It's just the power. And I learned so much about that process. I started scheduling these interviews, and this was late 2019. We get into 2020, March 2020, COVID hits.
Yeah.
And I was like, I had my first interview with a CEO in a company in Scotland. And I was like, do you still want to do this? And he's like, yeah, let's do it. So he was we were all in our homes, right? And and he's like in his like attic or something like that. I'm in this room in Minneapolis. We just have an amazing conversation. We have an amazing conversation, and everyone's heart was a bit more open, I think, around that time.
Yeah.
And people wanted to talk. They wanted to connect. And I was like, well, we're looking for sponsors for the show. He's like, talk to my marketing guy. He's in Chicago. I was like, okay. I talked to him. We have a great conversation. And I was like, hey, Jeff, like, how much were you paying at these conferences for these booths? Because you go to these conferences all the time. Because I'd done my research. I started with companies that already sponsored conferences. So coming from E-Trade, I said, marketing, they have marketing dollars. That's how I'm thinking about this ahead of time. And I was like, I'm going after, because podcasters think too small sometimes. They want to get like a sponsor to pay them like $50 or something. Right. I was like, no, I'm coming from corporate. I know these guys have money and you just got to get to their marketing departments. So I was speaking to the CMO of this company and he said, oh, we pay like $20,000 for these booths. And I'm like, well, there's no more conferences for the next year. So in my mind, I did half of that as $10,000. Just to make it an easy number, I made it $9,000. I said, well, for $9,000, you could sponsor the first season of my podcast, the Vertical Farming Podcast. He thought about it for a little while and he's like, yeah, okay, let's do it. So mind you, Tammy, I hadn't even released an episode
Just
yet.
like that.
I hadn't even released an episode of the show yet.
I'm flabbergasted.
I was too. But when you think about it, you're like, this makes sense, and No, tell
me how it makes sense. Because What kind of a company were they?
Well, but here's the thing. When I was doing my homework for this show, I would jump on a site called Crunchbase. Crunchbase will tell you all these companies that are getting funding. Just secured seed round, $1.1 million, just secured $3 million. And I was seeing these companies. So this company that I was speaking to, they had just gotten some funding. And in my mind, new funding equals one of the first spends you do when you get funding is you spend it on marketing. So I was literally thinking about all these things. And I credit my time at E-Trade because I was like, I remember the finance guys would come into the marketing department and it'd be like, hey, you've got $100,000 left in your budget. If you don't use it by the end of this month, you're going to lose it, right? And they didn't want to lose it because they wanted the same amount to be allocated next year. So they would just start doing these random projects. And I was like, okay, I just have to be top of mind for these marketing departments. And that's sort of how it happened. I asked them, if he's spending $20,000 for a booth, he's thinking that's a marketing expense. Right. I was like, you can't do those anymore. So they got money sitting in their coffers.
Right.
And then we over delivered. I made him the platinum sponsor of the company. If you listen to the show, my platinum sponsors, it's the first thing you hear. You don't even hear me talk about the guest. You're saying this episode's brought to you by IGS. And and it's in my voice. It's a host read ad. And then I'm able to charge a premium for that. So now I'm charging, and the show since then has made over 100K in sponsorship since launching that show. And I've actually spoken at Podcast Movement. They asked me to come in and speak, and I submitted a talk about this story about vertical farming podcast. So I'll send you the link for that so you can put it in the show notes. But
I definitely want to, yeah.
It was one of the most well-received talks at Podcast Movement, so much so that they made it free. They normally don't make the event talks free, but they selected a handful, and mine was one of them. So it's like available to anyone to watch at any time. And people just loved it because I told that whole story, how I basically just engineered this podcast. So now we've started playing with the categories, and I picked because you can pick 3 categories for a podcast. And one of them was nature. And I was like, well, nature, vertical farming, it's kind of related. When I did that 2 or 3 weeks later, I looked at the charts. It jumped to number 1 in like 20 different countries, small countries, countries like Kenya and other countries. But I could literally say that I had the number 1 podcast in vertical farming now because it jumped in those countries to the top of the list. And since then, it's always hovered in the top 20, top 50, top 100. But it's just the power of going super niche. And so now I have sponsors on the show. I'm interviewing these CEOs. And now I have to start going to these conferences because, I'm going to indoor farming conferences. Late 2022, my sponsor at the time, Cultivated, the CEO, texts me and he's like, would you like to go to Dubai? I was like, Dubai, sure. We're the host of or we have a pavilion for an indoor farming conference in Dubai. And, we've got, we can fly you out there. We'll put you up in a hotel and then you can just join us there and just interview some CEOs on site. I was like, sure. So never been, it just took us like 26-hour flight to Dubai. So the Burj Khalifa, I think it's called, that big tower. I didn't go climb up, but just kind of got to see the sights. It's a weird city. It's
a different environment. Yeah.
Different environment. But it was just one of those lifetime experiences. The next year, 2023, there was a conference in Germany called Vertifarm, and I had been speaking to the organizers, and they're like, we love the show. We love your energy. We'd love for you to come out. Maybe you can come. Oh, next to that booth in Dubai was the organizer from that conference. So we were talking the whole time, and they're like, you should come to our conference. I was like, if you want to fly me out there, I'd be happy to. And so fast forward, like 9 months later, I'm going to Dortmund, Germany for the Vertifarm conference. And it was just another experience there. And it's just been amazing. When you think about how many doors podcasting has opened in my life between the 2 shows, it's just amazing to think about creating these opportunities. And that's why I'm so adamant about like this coming back full circle, finding your voice, having a platform, creating your own stage. So many speakers, they try to get on other people's stages. I'm like, create your own stage. Like invite people to your stage, like you do with your show. Like you're not waiting for these opportunities to meet people.
Not at all.
You're making them yourself.
No, not at all. And then once you reach a certain number of episodes, I mean, I'm sure you get people, pitching you. Well, actually, I think that's how you found me. But and usually I don't answer them. But there was something.
You should share why, because I love stories like this.
I should share why I don't answer them?
Why you answered mine.
I'm trying to remember why I answered yours. What?
Is it related to my name?
It wasn't because of your name. No. I mean, yes, my grandfather's name was Harry, So I always have a soft spot in my name, soft spot for people named Harry, but that wasn't why. I think I think because you approached me and invited me to be on your show.
Yeah.
And I looked up your show and I saw that it wasn't a crappy show. So
well, that's good. That's what people are doing all the time. And I think there's a really good book called Never Lose a Customer Again by Joey Coleman. And I remember reading that years ago. What's fascinating about, he talks about the life of a customer in your world. And there's this part early on where they're looking at your stuff, but you don't know they exist.
Yeah.
So they're coming to your website, they're looking at your socials, they've read your book, and they're in your orbit, but you just haven't seen them yet. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting. I've always thought about that from a podcast perspective, because one of my mantras of my first show is treat your guests like gold.
Nice.
Right? I always want my guests to feel like it's the best experience they've ever had. Like from the moment they get the invite for the show, like here's a link, here's a form. We're not doing the dance back and forth Friday at 2, Saturdays at 5. That's like, everyone hates that. So I was like, I got to make this seamless. And then they fill out all their materials in once when I have their attention. What's their headshot? Because I've made that mistake of using the wrong headshot before. So I just kept improving the process. I sent them to a page that says, this is the guest prep form. This is what's going to happen right before the show. So you're ready. So, and then I just try to shine the light on them as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then afterwards, they get a marketing sheet, or I don't know if I've sent you yours yet, but it's the link of all the places we promoted it, including the graphics we created, because you never want a guest to work harder to promote your show.
Right.
Because they're giving you an hour of their time.
Exactly.
And you've probably been on the receiving end, and I have as well. Like, you go on a show and then they're like, hey, Harry, our episode's out. Can you please promote it? And that's the email.
Right. No, I do the same things you do. And I hope that you're having the same experience that you feel that you offer others, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, this is fascinating. And so do you do vertical farming yourself? I know you do some gardening.
We do actual farming, which is interesting, because the funny part is how it's all come together is, because I've been learning about the vertical farming industry, and it runs the gamut from the countertop unit where you can grow some basil and
I've got one of those.
LED lights, and those are beautiful, and they get pretty expensive because they have now the under the counter ones with the glass door and robotics on them. So, and then they have the shipping container sizes, and then they get to the big warehouse sizes.
Yes.
And it's been fascinating to just learn about how food gets to your plate, especially produce. Most people go to the supermarket and they don't think twice when they pick up these leafy greens. They're coming from, most of the time, from Salinas Valley. And I was living in New York at the time, traveling 3,000 miles to get, some leafy greens into my lettuce. And now I'm just more conscious, having these conversations with these CEOs and these founders about, this idea of local food. And even the word local, depending I don't know if it's a state restriction or federal, you can have food coming from as far away as 400 miles and still call it local. So it's come on, you're just kind of fooling people. So now the term is really hyper local. You've got these mushroom container farms growing mushrooms next to the restaurant. So literally the chef is making them, serving them in this, you can't get any fresher than that.
I love it. I love that.
And I've noticed the difference, Tammy. I'll go now and I get my leafy greens from a company here in Minnesota called Revel Greens. It's not a vertical farm, but it's a greenhouse. But I'm just amazed that I'll have a clamshell of leafy greens and it'll be fresh for 2 weeks. I mean, you got to throw in some paper towels to keep the humidity down. Right. But it's night and day between those bag lettuces and just these little things that people don't think. And people don't associate leafy greens with flavor, but when you have some that are freshly picked and well grown without pesticides, and so it's been an education process for me. And we are going to probably do something here because the weather in Minnesota gets cold. So we have a separate garage that's actually next door to this room, and that's kind of where we're going to do a mini greenhouse. But we do have a place where we start our greens in-house, and then we did a garden this year. So we just my girlfriend just pulled some squash, some tiny radishes that didn't do so well, a couple of scraggly looking jalapenos, but we started somewhere.
It's all learning though. It's always a learning. No matter how much you know, you learn every year. I've been doing this stuff for years, and I still don't know what I'm doing most of the time, but it's fun.
Yeah.
It really is fun. I love this whole I'm going to start listening to the vertical farming podcast now. You have me totally fascinated. So the other thing I wanted to make sure that people are aware of is that you're offering our audience a free video that's on your website that's called the 5 key pillars of a successful podcast that every business owner needs to know prior to launching. And we have a variety of people in our audience some of whom are business owners, some of whom are trying to decide whether to become business owners. So I think that could be very useful to people, and some people who are just contemplating starting a podcast. So I hope people will take advantage of that. Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we talk about here before we wrap up today?
It's just really a reminder for folks about this importance of like finding your voice. And I've been talking about, I have a newsletter I do. It's on my personal website, harrydotcom. So people can just go there.
Great.
And I started that, what I was working, just kind of following a couple of folks online. And I noticed this trend of like a newsletter that's more like a personal share. So now I've rebranded it to, it's called A Life Worth Living. I'm 53 and I want to share like all these ups and downs, some of which I've shared, here in this conversation, but just a reminder that there's no like one path in life. And this right better than I do based on all these conversations you've been having, and there's no wrong path either. And so a lot of times, we beat ourselves up and we think like, oh my God, I made a mistake and I made the decision. I wouldn't be where I am today had I not made all those decisions, good or bad, however they looked at the time, but they made me who I am today as a person.
Yeah,
for sure, Tammy. So I really just want to remind people of that. And that's sort of what I do with the newsletter. I share what's happening. I share like releases of my podcast episodes. And then there's like some information about how to work with me at the end. But it's really more, I've shared stuff about like ADHD, being neurodivergent, I've shared that story from Thailand, because I just want to remind people, like, it's not all like the pretty filters on like the Facebook and the Instagram. That's not like real life. And people want to be able to resonate with you. And so I've done some men's work that I did recently last year, joined a men's circle. I talked about how transformational that was in my life. And just kind of like painting this picture, I'll share like a DJ mix I did. Like, it's so random. And, you think about like, we all have these little hobbies and the things that make us who we are. And so I'm really passionate about the power of podcasting, which is amazing. It's been a truly life-changing for me. I even got to meet the co-creator of the movie Aliens and Total Recall.
Oh, fun.
I met a mutual friend of his, and she's like, oh, we should do a podcast about his life story. So I was in Venice, California in like 2012 or it was later. It was 2018. And I was at his house in Venice and interviewing him. And I remember watching the movie Alien. I was like, it's a really amazing movie and really scary. But I was like, this is the guy who wrote that scene that's like freaks everyone out. And we did a 6-part series on him. And unfortunately, his health deteriorated. So he's not like, I think he's in the hospital now. It was just capturing that moment and like and then being able to like preserve his voice. And so when you think about like, this idea of like even our parents, like, I think about future generations. We're trying for a child ourselves, and, you want to leave something behind, and you think about all these memories that, the future generations will have. So it's really just kind of like these time capsules that we're creating, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah. I love the way you describe that. So in general, what is the best place for people to find out more about your work? And I mean, there's harrydotcom, right? Yeah.
And then my agency is fullcast.co.
Okay.
Fullcast.co. And there's a link to the video there.
Great.
You just click the play button. It'll just ask for an email, and then it'll start playing the video right away. So
nice.
I just wanted to make a free resource available because there's so many questions people ask about podcasting. And I nothing I teach is like this super secret sauce. It's there, but it'll take you like hundreds of hours to just comb through the stuff on YouTube. Yeah. So I just like to give the best practices and things
that's great
for me and our clients, just to kind of speed you along the learning curve. And then if you decide there's some other information you need or some other help I can provide, then there's ways to do that.
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm sure our listeners will appreciate that.
Yeah.
And one final question, you kind of answered it a little bit, but I'm going to ask it and see if you come up with another brilliant answer, because I think you have a bunch of them. And that is, a lot of people listening to this are also trying to decide what's next for them. What would be a key piece of advice that you would offer someone who's in a transition or deciding what's next for them?
It's an important decision, and I think nowadays, and possibly post-COVID, where people are realizing like maybe this idea of being in a 9 to 5 is not meant for me. I think if you've always felt like there's something else calling you and you're not doing the work you were meant to do, I think it's helpful to like, even if you just start writing it out, you don't need to be as hasty as I did and just kind of burn the boats and just jump. But, nowadays it's helpful to have that security blanket. But I think life is too short to not be doing work that lights you up, Tammy.
Yeah.
I think it's important to be doing things. I'm in this new accountability group. It's called the Dharma Artist Collective.
Oh, wow.
And we get on a Zoom at 7 a.m. We all have our cameras on, and then we have our phones and do not disturb. So we don't like, if we go into the internet, it's for a purpose, and then we come back and we do what we can. And I've been doing some really good work in those stretches, really thinking about like, do I consider myself an artist, and how do you define an artist? And if you're in the zone and doing what you like to do in that moment, you're fulfilling your dharma. And I think I think it's an important concept. And I truly believe everyone here on this planet has a dharma.
Yeah.
And some people think, well, I just do this one thing, and remove that word just. Like whatever you do, if you do it well, I just do like in computer programming, well, then that's your art. That's your art, and you do it very well. So I would just really encourage everyone to that's listening and or watching to just think about, that Mary Oliver quote keeps coming up in our group, but what are we going to do with this one precious life? Something to that effect, and it's been resonating strongly. And naturally, as I get older, I think about that more, but there's no reason, like whether you're in your 20s or your 60s or 70s, just, it's time to take care of your body, take care of yourself, gotten back into working out 3 times a week. And, we lose muscle mass as we get older. And, you see, I remember as a kid, I'd watch this TV show called 30 something, and I'd be like, whoa, those adults, they're so old, and look at them. They're so cool.
That's so funny.
The show, right?
Well,
yeah.
And now that we are both much older than they ever were then, I'm going to say thank you so much for being here. This has really been a lot of fun. And I want to thank you for your hospitality. And I'm really glad that we were able to do this again today. So, Harry, thank you so, so much for being here.
Likewise. Thank you for coming on. It's always fun to tell that story. And I always find new ways to tell it, or add pieces that I kind of forgot or I had forgotten about. So it's always nice to take that trip down memory lane. And sometimes we don't take the time to look back at our accomplishments. So I really appreciate that opportunity.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.